Approaching La Palma from the west, Mount Tahiti juts nearly 2.5 miles into the sky on the adjacent island of Tenerife. Mount Tahiti is extinct, but under the lush green slopes of La Palma, the magma still boils, erupting 7 times in the last 535 years. And reminders of those eruptions are everywhere, from the crashing waves on the volcanic rock coastline to the rolling dunes of crushed black rock further up the mountain. Life is just returning to some areas where fairly recent eruptions changed the landscape forever. But nearby, trees stand straight and tall in an eerie calm on a part of the slope not recently scorched by the molten rock. This is a land of volcanoes. That's what's left of a volcano that erupted hundreds of thousands of years ago. But this is the rock that's causing the ruckus today, or at least a little part of it. That rock and all these rocks, in fact, this entire mountain is at risk, possibly, of falling into the ocean. And not just this part of the mountain, but the next ridge and the one after that. Maybe a total of 100 cubic miles of rock. Some scientists say that a massive collapse here could generate waves much larger than the devastating tsunami waves we've recently seen.
That wave is a good 15, 20 feet tall.
Waves that would spread all the way across the Atlantic.
Get in, get in, get in!
To understand how this is possible, you have to understand the island. From space, you can see what's left of the huge crater from a big eruption 1.5 million years ago. But the ridge to the south, called Cumbre Vieja, is much younger, formed and changed by eruptions in fairly modern times. In 1971, the southern tip of the island belched fire and smoke, spectacular, but close to the mountain's base, so there was little effect. But it was 22 years before that, in 1949, when this part of Cumbre Vieja opened up and spewed rocks and lava for a month, sending tons and tons of it down into the sea. And it's what happened during that eruption that has people concerned today. The fault split the mountain and the western side slipped downward. Here you see where the fault opened up. Not much, but enough for scientists to know that this part of the western slope is loose. On clear days, you can see the fault on some of the mountain peaks.
Here it comes. Get out of here!
The recent landslide in Southern California gives you an idea what the concern is. But scientists calculate that a La Palma landslide would be 1,000 or more times bigger, involving the whole southwestern part of the island, and they say it could fall much faster. Up here in the clouds, you can see that the island of La Palma is unusually steep. And that means that if a big part of this mountain came loose, it would have tremendous energy as it fell about 1.5 miles down into the ocean. Now, to understand this better, we go 6,000 miles away to the west coast of the U.S., Santa Cruz, California, where scientists there are using computers to simulate what could happen if, and it's a very big if, an eruption here caused a massive landslide. This is the University of California at Santa Cruz, south of San Francisco, and the home of Dr. Stephen Ward. He's been studying, mapping, and analyzing the forces that create tsunamis. Dr. Ward thinks it's just a matter of time.
The Canaries have had about 12 mega landslides in the last 2 million years, and we think that the westernmost island, called La Palma, is ready to do it again.
And when it happens, whether it's the next decade or the next millennium, according to Ward's computer analysis, it's going to happen fast.
It goes to a very high speed very quickly, 20, 30, 50, 100 meters per second, which is, I don't know, what's 200 miles an hour. So it's a tremendous amount of energy in such a thing. And in fact, it's equivalent to using up all the world's nuclear weapons all at once.
And this tremendous force, according to Stephen Ward, would create a wave thousands of times more powerful than the Asian tsunami in December. And the monster wave, which the computer says would start out over 300 feet high, would spread across the Atlantic at a tremendous speed. Watch the hours tick off at the bottom left as the wave expands in all directions.
As it spreads out, like all waves, they get smaller because they're covering more area. But the waves are so big to begin with that even when they get across to Brazil or Cuba or Florida, there's a height in meters, 10 meters, and then when it comes ashore,
30 feet, more or less.
And when it comes ashore, it grows.
So the computer is saying that 9.5 hours after a collapse on La Palma, a series of monster waves would reach the American coastline.
Look at that.
Waves 2, 3, or more times as big as the ones that hit Indonesia and Thailand, moving ashore with unimaginable power. But if tsunamis can really happen in our part of the world, shouldn't there be a record of it happening in the past? Well, it turns out there is. Ironically, it was just recently discovered that a major tsunami hit the west coast of the American continent back in 1700, caused by a magnitude 9 earthquake offshore. And in the Atlantic, a tsunami caused by an underwater quake-induced landslide off New England killed 27 people in eastern Canada in 1929. Of course, not many people lived there at the time. So we know tsunamis can happen in both oceans, but we've always heard that the Bahamas would protect South Florida if one happened in the Atlantic. Well, maybe or maybe not. These huge rocks on Eleuthera in the eastern Bahamas seem to have been flung here by a tremendous force, a force that some scientists say might have been a mega tsunami, triggered by a landslide in the Canary Islands.